4 days before Christmas in 1988, a truck driver hauling timber was traveling slowly along Duncan Bridge Road, a remote stretch surrounded by vast pine plantations near Millwood, in Ware County, rural Georgia, when something abandoned on the side of the road caught his attention. It was a large wooden television cabinet, the kind with closing doors that was commonly found in American living rooms at the time. In that rural area, illegal dumping was nothing unusual. Broken appliances, old furniture, and discarded junk were often left along the roadside. Even so, the truck driver decided to stop. Maybe the cabinet was still in decent condition, and with Christmas so close, perhaps it could become an unexpected gift. Something someone else had thrown away might still be useful to him. But as he approached the TV cabinet, he immediately noticed a strong smell coming from inside, a heavy, unmistakable odor of something rotting. When he looked closer, he saw that one of the cabinet doors was partially open. Curious, he pulled it farther open. Hidden inside was a black metal suitcase. At that moment, it became clear this was not just abandoned trash on the side of the road. The truck driver noticed something even stranger. Parts of the suitcase appeared to be sealed with concrete, as if someone had tried to prevent it from being opened or to hide whatever was inside. Driven by curiosity and a growing sense that something was terribly wrong, he grabbed a tool from his truck and began forcing the metal case open. After several minutes, he managed to partially pry it apart. Inside was another bag, a duffel bag. When he pulled open the zipper, the smell became even stronger. An unmistakable odor, the smell of death. And in that instant, that isolated road became the scene of one of the most disturbing cases in the region, and perhaps in all of the United States. Wrapped in a blanket was the body of a small child, hidden as if someone had tried to erase her existence from the world forever. Unable to believe what he was seeing, the truck driver immediately called the police. A short time later, investigators arrived at the scene and found an image none of them would ever forget for the rest of their lives. Even in an advanced state of decomposition, the little girl was still wearing a small knitted sweater with colorful ribbons tied in her hair. Simple details, human details, details that made it clear that, at some point, someone had cared for her. And perhaps that was exactly what made everything even crueler. She appeared to be only 3 or 4 years old. But as investigators began examining the scene, a disturbing question started to emerge. Who would try to hide the body of a child inside an old television cabinet abandoned in the middle of nowhere? The discovery of the little girl's body immediately turned that small rural area into a place filled with fear and tension. News spread quickly throughout Ware County. Parents began calling their children inside earlier in the evenings, residents started locking their doors at night, and an unsettling feeling took over the community. Who was that child? And who could be capable of hiding the body of a little girl inside a suitcase sealed with concrete? In the hours following the discovery in December 1988, investigators from Ware County and officers from the Georgia State Police launched a major task force to identify the victim. Teams traveled rural roads, visited isolated homes, and went door-to-door interviewing residents, searching for any clue about missing children in the area. But nothing surfaced. No family was searching for a missing little girl. No recent missing persons report seemed to match. It was as if that child had never existed. That left only the autopsy as a possible way to discover who she had been. Even in the late 1980s, forensic examinations in the United States were already capable of revealing important information, even from bodies in advanced stages of decomposition. Medical examiners analyzed bones, hair, preserved tissue, and the clothing found with the body. What they discovered shocked investigators. The little girl had been dead for somewhere between 1 and 2 months. During all that time, her body had remained hidden inside that abandoned television cabinet on the side of the road without anyone noticing. Until, purely out of curiosity, a truck driver decided to stop. Despite the severe decomposition, medical examiners were able to establish a basic profile of the victim. She was an African-American girl between 3 and 4 years old, approximately 2 feet 9 inches tall, and weighing just over 29 pounds. Her ears were pierced. And as mentioned earlier, she was wearing a small knitted sweater and still had colorful ribbons tied in her hair. Because of the advanced decomposition, the autopsy revealed very little about what had actually happened to her. Medical examiners ruled out injuries caused by gunshots or stab wounds, but they were unable to determine exactly how she died. The official cause of death was ultimately listed only as homicide by undetermined means. And that created an even more disturbing situation for investigators. If they could not determine exactly how the child died, then there were almost no clues pointing to who had done this. But one thing seemed obvious. Whoever placed that little girl inside a suitcase sealed with concrete and abandoned her body on a remote road was someone extremely cruel. As the days passed, the case began receiving coverage from newspapers and television stations across Georgia. The image of the unidentified child found just days before Christmas quickly shocked the entire state. And because of the time of year she was found, investigators gave the little girl a temporary name: Christmas Doe. A temporary name created only until her real identity could be discovered. But the days kept passing, and no answers came. Investigators from the Ware County Sheriff's Office, alongside agents from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, began to believe the little girl might not even have been from that area. With the amount of attention the case had received, it seemed impossible that a local child could disappear without anyone noticing. The search was then expanded. First across Georgia, then into other states. Authorities reviewed missing children reports, cross-checked information through national databases, and followed dozens of leads over the following months. But none of them led anywhere. No one knew who that little girl was. No family came forward searching for her. No missing child report matched the girl found inside the suitcase. No name, no information. A forensic artist created a portrait showing what the little girl may have looked like while alive. Soon after, investigators also commissioned a sculpted bust based on the features reconstructed during the autopsy. The images began circulating through newspapers, television programs, and police departments across different American states. For a while, it seemed impossible that nobody would recognize that child. The tips did come in. Anonymous phone calls. Supposed similarities, stories about missing girls. But every new lead ended the same way with no answers. Months turned into years, and years turned into decades. Detectives who had worked the case retired. Some died without ever discovering who the little girl inside that steel suitcase abandoned on the roadside inside an old television cabinet really was. Evidence boxes aged inside police storage rooms while the case slowly became just another forgotten file. But there was something about that child investigators could never completely let go of. Maybe it was the cruel way she had been discarded. Maybe it was the colorful ribbons still tied in her hair. Or maybe it was the fact that, somewhere out there, an entire family existed that had simply never come looking for her. Years later, one investigator would admit something disturbing. Even if they never managed to arrest anyone, he had only one goal before he died: to give that little girl her name back. Because to him, no one should disappear from the world without being remembered. No one should become nothing more than a nickname inside a police file. But that was exactly what happened. As time passed, the little girl found days before Christmas stopped being seen as a real child and became only an identity created by police. Christmas Doe. The case grew colder and colder. And for a long time, it seemed that little girl would remain nameless forever. But a closed case never truly meant a forgotten case. And inside Georgia law enforcement agencies, the Christmas Doe case had become exactly that, an open wound. One of those cases that continued haunting investigators even decades later. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, every time a new technology emerged, detectives returned once again to the same box of evidence. Photographs were re-examined, old reports were reviewed, databases of missing children were updated repeatedly in the hope that somewhere a name would finally appear matching the little girl found inside the suitcase. But nothing ever surfaced. At one point, a lead brought investigators to the city of Tifton after information suggested the girl might have been named Bridget. For a while, it seemed like the first real direction the case had taken in years. But the lead quickly fell apart. Once again, it was not her. At one point, an anonymous reward was even offered for any information capable of identifying the child. Still, no one came forward. No relatives, no reports, no answers. As time passed, investigators began considering something even more disturbing. Maybe the little girl had never lived in Ware County. Maybe she was not even from Georgia. Maybe someone had driven for hours simply to abandon her body on that isolated road surrounded by pine trees. And that made everything even harder. Because without a name, there was no starting point. Without an identity, there was no family to trace. Without a past, there was no suspect. And so the years continued passing. While the world changed, that little girl remained frozen in time, silently waiting for someone to finally say who she was. Then, at the end of 2019, investigators decided to place their hopes in a technology that had begun transforming cold cases across the United States. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation launched a partnership with forensic genetic genealogy specialists, a technique that, since the 2010s, had started giving names back to victims once believed doomed to be forgotten forever. For the first time in more than 30 years, there was a real possibility of discovering who the little girl inside that abandoned roadside suitcase truly was. Using DNA extracted from the child's remains, scientists began reconstructing a genetic profile. It was a slow, complex, and extremely delicate process. Little by little, the results began pointing toward a possible family connection in the city of Albany, located about 112 miles from where the body had been found. For the first time in more than 3 decades, investigators had something concrete. A direction, possible starting point. But one crucial piece was still missing: the little girl's name. Then, in December 2022, on the exact 34th anniversary of the discovery of the body, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation made a new public appeal on television and in newspapers, asking anyone with information connected to Albany to come forward. And that was when something happened that would completely change the case. About a month after the appeal aired, a woman called the police. She said she believed she knew who the child was. Not because of the news coverage, but because of memories from her own childhood. The woman told investigators she believed Christmas Doe might have been the daughter of a distant cousin in her family. According to her, when she was still a child, she had heard that the little girl had gone to live with her father in another city. But throughout her entire life, that story had never seemed true. Something felt wrong. Something that, even decades later, she had never been able to forget. Investigators then began analyzing family records, genetic connections, and old documents. And not long afterward, the truth finally began to emerge. She was identified as Kenyatta Odom, a 5-year-old girl from the city of Albany. And in that moment, everything changed. For the first time in decades, investigators were no longer trying to discover who the child inside that abandoned roadside suitcase was. Now the question was different: who killed Kenyatta Odom? As soon as her name surfaced, investigators moved away from the idea of an unknown stranger. Little by little, the focus of the case shifted inward, toward the very circle where the little girl should have been safe. Toward the people who had direct access to her life, especially her mother, Evelyn Odom, and her husband at the time, Ulster Sanders, who had been her boyfriend when the crime occurred. The truth began taking shape in an increasingly disturbing way. The person responsible for that child's death was not some stranger wandering along a road in Georgia. It was someone who had lived with her every day. Someone who was supposed to protect her. And when the truth finally surfaced, investigators realized the little girl had suffered far longer than they had ever imagined. In November 2023, Evelyn Odom and Ulster Sanders were arrested, and throughout the investigation, relatives described Kenyatta as a fragile, quiet child who was often underfed. Signs that something inside that house had already been wrong long before the final outcome. As the case progressed, witnesses began revealing an even darker reality hidden behind closed doors. According to accounts gathered during the investigation, Evelyn Odom did not treat her daughter with simple emotional distance. There were also signs of constant resentment. Kenyatta had siblings, but inside that home, she seemed to occupy a different place, as though she had been unwanted from the very beginning. Part of that burden was reportedly tied to the circumstances surrounding the child's birth, as she was allegedly conceived through sexual assault, a detail that, according to testimony, directly influenced the way she was treated within the family. In addition, Kenyatta faced physical difficulties, including recurring bladder control problems. And according to witness statements, that became a frequent trigger inside the household. What should have been treated as normal childhood accidents instead became reasons for punishment and constant tension. Over time, what should have been an ordinary home gradually turned into an increasingly unstable environment marked by fear, silence, and a routine no one outside the house seemed able to see. With every accident, with every mistake, The reactions became harsher. Isolation, punishments, violence. And little by little, the house stopped feeling like a home. It became a place of fear. According to investigators, the breaking point came after yet another one of those incidents. In response, Evelyn allegedly filled a bathtub with extremely hot water and forced the child inside. The result was devastating, severe burns, and a condition that quickly spiraled out of control. In his statement, Ulysses Sanders claimed he saw how serious the injuries were and begged Evelyn to seek medical help. But according to him, that never happened. The fear of losing custody of the other children allegedly mattered more. No help, no hospital, no chance. Kenyatta was left lying in a bed while time worked against her. Days later, when they finally realized how serious the situation had become, it was already too late. And this is where the case changes direction once again. Instead of asking for help, another decision was made: to hide it. The child's body was prepared, placed inside a suitcase, and hidden inside a large wooden television cabinet. It was then transported for miles to a remote area of Ware County, where it was abandoned as if that little girl had never existed. In the days, months, and years that followed, the explanation for Kenyatta's disappearance always remained the same. She had supposedly been sent to live with her father outside Georgia. An explanation that, for a very long time, nobody questioned. But in August 2025, the trial finally came to an end. After weeks of testimony and only a few hours of deliberation, the verdict was announced. Evelyn Odom was found guilty of malice murder, first-degree child cruelty, conspiracy, and concealing a death. She was acquitted only on the aggravated assault charge. Her sentence: life in prison, with the possibility of parole review only after 30 years. Meanwhile, Ulysses Sanders is still awaiting final sentencing following an agreement with prosecutors. Authorities describe the outcome as delayed justice, but necessary justice. After more than 3 decades, Kenyatta finally had her name returned to her. Christmas Doe no longer existed, and what remained was a truth that had been buried for far too long. If you made it this far, consider subscribing to the channel. It truly helps bring more cases like this one with this same level of detail. And now, if you want to continue down this path of dark investigations and real stories that took decades to solve, there's another video appearing on your screen right now.